Okay, we are recording.
Yay!
Yeah. So the point here is that I'm doing an article for Model D about like LGBT culture in the city, but sort of more specifically LGBT spaces, kind of like
Okay,
historic and contemporary. Um,
gotcha.
it's a story that I've been assigned, but that I'm interested in, um, which is kind of like what are the spaces historically where the LGBT community in Detroit has like gathered and felt safe and done their own thing, which I think will be a little bit of it. But then the bigger part is like where are we now? Like what are the spaces now? Do we have enough spaces? Do we need spaces? Like how are we doing? Like what is it like to be LGBT in Detroit, which I already find like frustrating and difficult to write about because like I feel like the L and the G and the B and the T and then all the other ones that people keep adding are also different. So it's like
Yep.
hard to even like say, right? But I also I accept that it's a useful um, political construction that like this is the framework. This is what we talk about. So you can substitute queer for LGBT or whatever you want. Um,
Okay.
but I just think it seems like you would probably have a perspective on this question
Yes, I
or
do.
these questions. So go ahead.
I mean, where do I even begin? I
Well,
think that
yeah,
if you really want to have a discussion about what it means to be LGBTQ and otherwise identifying under that umbrella, specifically in Detroit,
yeah,
if you're not going to bring up anything about race,
right,
you're not having the right discussion.
of course,
And I think that's why it's really difficult for a lot of people, and I mean specifically like newer people that are like allied identifying, queer centric in general, not even just queer people. A lot of people don't want to discuss that
yeah,
because it's uncomfortable. And I think a very important part about dismantling systems of oppression that we as queer people have grown and learned to develop and adapt to. Part of dismantling that oppression is being uncomfortable.
yeah,
And I
sure,
think a lot of people, the second that they get uncomfortable, when you want to bring up the whole race aspect of being queer in Southeast Michigan, that like I'm glad people are uncomfortable because it means that we have started to dismantle that. But far too often, even when you remove the very specific geographic scope of Southeast Michigan, when you remove that, a lot of people don't even want to talk about it. Like, oh well, why did you have to go there? Oh well, why did you have to bring it up? It's like because it's important.
yes,
And if we're talking about LGBTQ spaces and you're not talking about race, what are you doing? You're just making yourself feel better.
right,
So I think specifically, because back in the late 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, I mean, Palmer Park was gay as fuck, girl.
yes,
I mean, you could throw a dead cow without hitting a gay bar.
yeah,
There was so much of it. But I think once the race crisis happened, every bit of Southeast Michigan stood to, well, specifically Detroit, every bit of Detroit stood to suffer.
Wait,
There was a lot of people that just left.
Once what happened?
Racism and xenophobia. Sorry, go ahead.
What did you say? Once what happened? You cut out for a second.
Oh, like once the race riots happened and
Yeah.
the white flight into the suburbs occurred,
Got it.
the gay community lost in a lot of ways.
Right.
But I think that also brings up another uncomfortable subject of internalized xenophobia and racism within our own community. I mean,
Right.
fat shaming, I'm not into Asians, like,
Oh, it's horrible.
I don't want to go to a Detroit gay bar because I'll get mugged. I mean, it's been pretty apparent in our community, even though we would like to tout ourselves as the most open, welcoming, accepting community, when we're really not on a whole. It's like when
Yeah.
people want to say all lives matter, I'm like, but they don't.
Right.
We would like them to. That's why we're saying Black Lives Matter. It's just, when the whole Orlando thing happened, how many full business days did it take before the media was like, this was a hate crime? So, anyways, if you want to talk about LGBTQ spaces in Detroit, you have to talk about race specifically.
Of course.
And I think it's a testament to the will of queerness in general that we've been able to maintain any semblance of queer nightlife, queer accepting spaces, safe spaces that we've had for a while. And I think that a few newer ones have opened up. But I think because of the white flight that happened,
Uh-huh.
the city got a very bad rep. And I think that literally forced a lot of gay people to go to other metropolitan areas where they knew that they would be accepted. Chicago, LA, New York, Miami, like
Yeah.
There were a ton of other similar-ish, quote-unquote, metropolitan spaces that offer the same type of community, protections, and safeness. So why would I stay here and struggle when I know I can go somewhere else and immediately set up shop? So I don't dog any of those people. Like, it's not, being queer doesn't mean that you have to take up, and champion the cause. But I think now, specifically with the fact that there are more, I'll be that bitch that says that, more white people involved in being in Detroit, let me flip my wig, now gays are starting to come back,
Is that so?
I think so, but I think because so much of what being queer in general has evolved into due to, honestly, the internet. It's very easy to look up and see what gays are doing in Dallas, what gays are doing in Chicago, what gays are doing, and so when you look at those scenes and you look at ours, it's really not the same. So again, I still don't fault any queer person that leaves here, even contemporarily, because, the spaces that we do have, the gay nights that we do have, it's a lot, I will say it's a bit incestuous. It's a lot of the same people. It's more like a homecoming, which is great.
Yes.
I love that we have that community where people can still know each other and be going to the same places. But at the same time, like, if you look at advertisements for gay bars, for gay nights, it's stock images of white, masculine-presenting men.
Isn't that
It's never a woman.
Yeah.
The whole lesbians get left out almost entirely. And don't even get me started about the trans girls down here, and trans people in general.
Right.
But, if I was someone that wasn't a white cis dude, I wouldn't really want to engage in our nightlife spaces. I wouldn't want to go to some of our safe spaces, because even when you're a newer gay person that, steps outside of that binary, like, let's just, for example, say that I'm a queer Latinx woman, and I go to Menjo's. I'm going to be met with side-eye. I'm going to be met at weird glances. What is she doing here? I don't know her. Who knows her? Because the times that I've gone out and met newer people, once they found out who I was friends with, where I worked, where I lived, what I did, and it connected to something that they knew, immediately the door opened. So I think that because we had so many people leave for seemingly justifiable reasons, those of us that have stayed, we have a chip on our shoulder. We're, not as quickly to open up to an outsider who's like, bitch, who do you know? Where do you work? How did you find out about this? Because so many people have come and gone that we're a little bit protective of our own spaces.
But do you think?
So I feel like.
Do you think that queer Latinx person is going to have a much better reaction elsewhere, like in other cities?
Yes, because even when that queer Latinx person elsewhere, and let's use Chicago.
Okay.
If that same person went out to what's considered a queer space and got a negative reaction, there are so many resources online in that specific city for her to connect to. We don't have that because we don't have the community. We don't have the basis for it because everyone's left. So that same Latinx, queer girl that went out to Menjo's and got side-eye, or went to Pronto and got side-eye, because that's where it's most predominant, suburban queer spaces. Yeah. You can quote me on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The queer spaces that I go to within the city limits, those are the accepting girls.
Right.
They can be a little salty. We're queens, we're salty, but the suburban queer spaces that I've gone into, I have no interest in.
It's awful.
Because there's a lot of internalized and subtextual xenophobia and racism I have no time for. Regardless, that same queer Latinx girl, she goes out in Chicago, has a weird night. There are other outlets for her. There are other places for her to go in her city where she can feel accepted, and we do not have that.
Physical places.
Physical places. Not even just, I'm talking about outside of Tumblr.
Yeah.
There's actual, places she can go. But in Southeast Michigan, there's affirmation, but you really only have access to that if you have money. And I just don't feel that as a major metropolitan city, we've done enough for our own community. No one's really been advocating for those spaces to exist. It is amazing that affirmations exist even in and of itself, but I really feel like that, we can have as many quote-unquote gay bars that we want, but if we don't have safe spaces where we can feel safe and protected, what's the real point? So I think a lot about being queer here, if you're someone that's really going to engage in those spaces and have those discussions and advocate for it, if you don't want to talk about the race aspect of it, you're not having this conversation. You're just saying and doing things that make you comfortable. And sadly, you know, living in a country where, you know, heteronormative patriarchy rules all,
right.
You know, it's really hard. I don't think we have enough spaces. I don't think we have enough bars, but we don't have the clientele. Everybody moves. Everybody leaves. And why shouldn't they? So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy and problem in and of itself. But at the same time, you know, it's like I have a very strong will. Like, I know that I want to stay here. I love it here. I was born and raised here. I have a vested interest. But it's sort of irrational to put that expectation or that mentality on someone else, even in the same circumstance, because it's a lot of work, you know? We don't have the same network of queers that have been ingrained in fighting for us like New York City has, like Chicago has, like San Francisco has, like Los Angeles has, like Hollywood, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Everyone that was here was like, oh, fuck this shit, I'm out of here. So that's why, you know, you and I are some of those queers that are in that weird background where, like, we understand some of the gripes of our suburban family, but we're those, like, city queens. They're like, girls, just open up your businesses down here. Girl, just buy a house down here. Let's make the neighborhood happen. Like, and I think that's why I get frustrated a lot, because at the whole point that you and I even have the rights that we have is that our, you know, our queer family from generations ago literally fought and died in the streets. Like, we kind of have to step up and act up. Like, Keith Haring was correct. You need to act up, sweetie. Like, the more that we're silent, the more that we allow ourselves to be silenced in a lot of ways, you know? And that's why I think some of those, like, no-hate silence photo shoots are so indicative of a larger issue. Like, no, we're choosing silence at this point. Specifically in 2016, if you are a queer person and you are not loud, you're being an asshole. You know, everyone's coming out journey is different, but those of us that are out, that live queerly, that don't live queerly all the time, you're now part of the problem. We're in the mainstream media. We're being talked about. I mean, the transgender lift on serving in the military was just raised, you know, lifted today. If you are a queer person, it is your prerogative to act up, to speak out, to discuss, to reach out, to organize, to build that community back up. And I think that we're at a really good crux where we could really go in that direction. But it's going to take a lot of people like the two of us that have that mentality to say, no, we're going to make this a safe, queer space. We're going to open up more spaces. We're going to build this community. And the only people doing it are the people that have been doing it for so long. I don't even fault them for it. Like, you know, a lot of people that own, I was just at Menjo's recently, and I had a really good interaction with not just the owner, but some of their older patrons. And we collected $1,500 that night, and $1,000 of that came from one of their oldest patrons that had been going there for forever. And it was one of those moments where, like, the generational gap in being queer was bridged for even just a few minutes, because he looked at me and said, if you guys hadn't done this, I wouldn't have donated. And what that said to me was sort of like, in a metaphysical, figurative sense, the passing of the torch.
Yeah.
Like, I still have not forgotten that interaction. His name was Lou, L-E-W. And in that moment, I was like, you're correct. You've done enough. It's our turn now. You know, and I know that a lot of work has been done here recently. A lot of queer people have been fucking some shit up and doing some awesome queer stuff. And I in no way want to discredit whether I know the person or not, whether I know the group or not. I know the work is happening. And I think the reason that we're at a very important crux or crossroads is that now it's a time where we really need to tie it together. We really need to reach out. We really need to stop being individual entities. You know, when it comes to activism, a lot of people talk about if your activism isn't intersectional, it's selfish. And I think we're at a point where, like, we have Latino groups advertising for, you know, advocating for queer people. We have a few Muslim groups. You know, like, we're all very separate because that's the culture and environment we were in. You know, it's a very different world now as opposed to the 80s, 90s, or even early 2000s. Shit changes constantly now.
Yeah.
And I really think more than ever, these people that have been advocating, and some of the younger people that have been doing a lot of work, like I went to some vigils and met a lot of really great people that are doing work I'd never heard of. I think we need to start blending together. We really need to start making this one big machine that advocates not even just for every color of the rainbow, but for every flag we identify with, for every letter of LGBTQ and plus. I think that it's a time where, yes, we've had to sort of exist individually in our different spaces, but now we need to sort of say, if all of us aren't getting equal rights, then none of us are really getting equal rights at the end of the day. Because even with marriage equality, only if you can afford it can you get married. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not upset that we have had some victories, but I am in no way complacent, because even with the military ban being lifted, a trans person can go serve in the military, come home to their job in North Carolina, and be fired immediately. So is it really a win? This is the time when all queer identifying, whether they're allied or non-gender conforming, everybody needs to come together. And I think Southeast Michigan is the perfect place for that to do it. I mean, Detroit was literally given its name from the French because three things converged in one spot. I think this is the place for a huge queer revolution to happen, that we're really on the cusp of it. And I think that if we got a lot of those groups and individuals together in a room, everyone would be saying, yes, ma'am, like, let's do this. So I think it's time that we all woke up and stopped going to Pronto. I said it.
Yeah. So where should we be going? What are these
Detroit.
spaces? And, like, what kind of spaces within Detroit?
There are plenty of gay bars in Detroit that are amazing, amazing safe spaces that only seem unsafe because we feel safer in numbers. And that's what I think makes being queer awesome, is that you can be, like, there are times I've been at warehouse parties in New York, I've been this, that, and the other place, with a giant room full of queer people that I don't know, and I feel safe. There's something that I love about one of the gifts that, heteronormative patriarchal culture gave queerness, is that once you meet a queer person, that's family. That's someone you know. That's someone you can trust. And so I think that we have a lot of spaces, but people need to get over their xenophobia and racism and just arbitrarily decide, we're going to the Woodward tonight. We're going over here tonight. Like, there's not a lot, but there's enough that we could be packing bars every night. There is no reason that you need to go all the way out in Warren or all the way over in Inkster or all the way over here. Boo, you can come downtown and have yourself a gay old time and not have to worry about your car getting broken into or getting mugged. And see, the reason that all that shit is racist. That shit happens in New York, that shit happens in San Francisco, but you don't see think pieces being done like, San Francisco is so unsafe, New York City is so bitch, people moving there in droves.
Right.
So when you say, oh, well, I don't want my car to get broken into, I would appreciate it more if you said, oh, I'm secretly internalizing my racism. Like, I just don't feel like going out tonight.
Right.
So there are spaces, but just like being queer, it sucks that right now that you, as you said, you have to know somebody. You have to know what's going on. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. That doesn't give you a free out. Like, I was someone that was 17 when I started college and moved to New York City, and I knew no one. I literally knew nobody. Within months, I had a giant support system. I had a ton of friends. I was going here. I was going there. And that speaks to queerness in other metropolitan cities. We can do that here. But I think because everyone left, those of us that have stayed get a little salty when newbies show up. I think everyone in general needs to be a little bit more understanding. But some of these suburban girls that got burned in the hood before,
right.
It's time for you to come back. Like, it's time, girl. It was our space. It was totally our space. You couldn't throw a dead cat without hitting a gay bar in Detroit.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like this is a new thing for us. This is an old thing for us. So I really think that it's time. I really think that there are a lot of rich queens that live in those suburbs that spend their money elsewhere. It's time for you to start spending it back down here. It's time. You want a neighborhood? Let's set it up. I think, the internet, really allows a lot of people to be a slacktivist. I call myself a slacktivist. All I do is post shit on Facebook, but a lot of people want to just sit and wait for someone else to do it and then go, and we don't have enough, like, initiators. We don't have enough originators. There are people that have tried so many times, and their nights failed because of this, that, and the other thing. So people get bitter, I just think it's a time for everyone to sort of set their shit aside and go for it.
Okay.
Okay,
yeah. Well, so one question I have, I mean, like, you're talking a lot about you're talking about bars as safe spaces, which I get and I affirm. Um, you're talking about the possibility of a gayborhood, which I also think could be a nice thing. But like for my own personal experience, which is like, admittedly like white, whatever, maybe queer, maybe gay. I'm still not sure how I feel like my identification is always changing. But like one of the things that I appreciate about Detroit is that I feel integrated, right? Like I feel like I'm not like ghettoized. I'm not segregated. And one of the things that I have found myself is that like we are fortunate to have these spaces that are more mixed and more integrated. And then like when I go to a boys' town or like a West Hollywood, I'm kind of repulsed at like the at like the homogeneity of the space of the places. And I think that like we're kind of lucky that we don't have a gayborhood because we get the opportunity to be more with all kinds of different people. And I was thinking about this because one of the reasons I wanted to reach out to you specifically is that, like, Chemo's gay booty camp I felt like was really pivotal for me in like this idea of what could be a queer space that wasn't centered around drinking. And like being bitchy, like some like a whole other social space, a space that was more productive, more about like well-being, and then created this sense of community and camaraderie that for me was like super special. I was like, well, this is like a whole new thing. This isn't just like going to the bar.
Totally.
Like, and then going to your class at Detroit Tough, I felt like what was special about that is that you were taking this space, which is historically and traditionally the sort of super like hetero mask environment, and then like just queering the fuck out of it in this way that I think made everybody in attendance feel really comfortable and really at ease. And that's kind of something that I'm personally interested in, is like how do you take spaces that aren't queer but like make them inclusive? And I think maybe that's like where because we don't have a gayborhood and because we do have this like decentralized community here, like maybe we have more of an opportunity here to do that instead, to like make more inclusive spaces for more kinds of people. And I understand that that's coming from my own like white dude perspective, and that that's not the same for like a trans person of color to feel like the same space is inclusive, right? But I don't know if you have any thoughts about any of that.
Oh, I have so many thoughts. And I'm so glad you brought this up because I do completely agree with you. I think that being queer in Southeast Michigan right now is different because we don't have a gayborhood. There's not this massive community to plug into, so you sort of get to develop your own identity of what queerness means to you.
Yeah.
The only reason that I find it problematic is that sometimes I feel like instead of going the new agey route that you and I both have, like finding inclusive spaces, a lot of people want to like assimilate. There's this weird assimilationist, like, well, I just want to be like everyone else. And I like the idea that there are specifically queer spaces where if you're that crazy queer person that's like against the heteropatriarchy, we got a space for you.
Yeah.
So I think it comes more from, because I agree with you. I want to find spaces that are just inclusive. When I go to Boys Town, I want to die. But I love that we have created a space for those queens, like those queens that want to be queens with other queens and giving their queer money to other queer people. That's great.
Yeah.
But I really like the inclusive part. But I never want to shut out any part of my queerness. Any one of my queer family. I want them to know that whether you want to be in the inclusive space or the exclusive space, that's one of the brilliant parts about being queer. Is that specifically being a white masculine-ish presenting dude, we get to make that choice. So I want to have spaces for people that can make the choice, but it's really important to still have those spaces for people that don't ever get to make the choice. That that their presentation lets people know immediately. Right. So I think having both is actually kind of important. Right. And we have found those spaces. We have found those bars that are inclusive, that the bouncer, the bartender knows, like, hey, if anyone gives you any shit, you let me know. Like, I love that those spaces are there. But sometimes, like, a trans girl of color is not going to feel safe going to the well. You know what I'm saying? Right. Those spaces that I feel safe aren't safe for everyone.
Yeah.
But the main reason that, just going for the inclusive spaces. What you're talking about is breaking down, like, decades and, like, societal, like, pillars of how life is supposed to be. Like, so many people have been raised in families where, like, it's a man and a woman, it's a man and a woman. And if we start making these, like, what you're talking about is societal change. What I'm talking about is, like, neighborhood changes. Like, I feel like in the long term, advocating for having a neighborhood and having specifically queer safe spaces gives, like, sort of paves that road to the point where we can start changing minds. We can start changing societal standards. Because when you start with societal standards, you get that weird white dude that's like, I know what I'm kid. It's hard engaging in some of those discussions because, part of breaking down systems of oppression is being uncomfortable. And not a lot of people are, like, cool with uncomfortable stuff,
Right.
Being queer people, we're sort of born and bred to be uncomfortable pretty much all the time.
Right.
And it's nice that you and I have grown up in spaces where we become comfortable, but straight people aren't used to being uncomfortable. When you live in a society that was built for you, and someone tells you, like, hey, this is kind of screwed up, you're going to be uncomfortable and a little defensive. So, I mean, I love that I've met some straight people that aren't that way, but that's not everyone. You and I both know that.
Right.
So if we want to talk about just making all these inclusive spaces, we have, like, decades of familial and societal, almost like storytelling that we have to undo. And I think it's much easier to create a neighborhood, create a bunch more queer-centric spaces, and then invite those communities into them because they're safe spaces. We accept everybody. And that's how you start changing minds. You don't change minds with ideology. You don't change minds with means. You change minds with experience. Experiences, I should say.
Of course.
It's going to take a lot of work. And that, I think Jesse Williams on the BET Awards the other night said it perfectly that, a lot of times we feel like when we engage in these spaces that we have to explain, that we have to walk people through it, and you don't. Because a lot of these people that are calling into question, like gay rights, black rights, immigrant rights, something that Jesse said was very powerful and spoke to me is that if you're not advocating for the rights of those being oppressed, you don't get to give notes to those advocating for them. It's really easy for you to sit behind a keyboard and be like, oh man. But if you haven't been about that life ever, your opinion actually doesn't matter. And that's what I've always told people. You want to hop into a discussion about trans people, start listening. You don't get to talk initially. And again, white heteronormative patriarchy tells you, you just get to talk.
Right.
So, I think, I agree with you. I would love for all of it to be inclusive, but I'd much rather lay some bricks so that we can have a pathway instead of having our building permit shut down.
Cool. Okay. Are there places that are doing it right in Detroit?
What do you mean by right?
Are there places... right. I mean, are there places that are welcoming of sort of the spectrum of the LGBTQ population?
Yes, there are. But again, like you said, you have to know somebody. You have to know what it is. And I think that those spaces that are inclusive, because they are, can do a much better job of boosting that message. Like, one of the things that broke my heart when we had to leave, when we all got pushed out of Detroit Tough, the first time I ever went there was just to look at it. I Googled it at work. I got off work and went and looked at it.
What did you Google?
And I opened it. What did you say?
What did you Google?
Oh, like gyms in Detroit, and Detroit Tough was the first thing that came up. So I opened the door, and the first thing I saw on the inside of the door, because there were all those stickers, was the rainbow pyramid. And I immediately, breathed a sigh of relief. I was like,
right.
Oh, I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And so, Roger and Tara were very big on that. Like, everyone is welcome here. Any type of weird, closed-minded bullshit is not welcome here. But I think we need more people like that. Like, bar owners, even outside of bars, just people that own spaces in general, people that have organizations that are inclusive, need to start going out of their way to throw the LGBTQ in there. Like, hey, our non-gender conforming family, our trans brothers and sisters, our queer family, we want you too. Like, we're at a point where we need you to say that.
Yeah.
Because not everyone is like you and I. You and I are different. And so until everyone in my family can walk into a space the same way I do, I still have work to do.
And how do you?
So I think those spaces exist, but I don't. And I think that they don't do it out of fear. And I think that fear is far too powerful right now, and that I really do personally put a lot of responsibility. If you're an inclusive space owner and you're not really boosting that message of inclusivity, is it really inclusive? Or are you being selective about who you let in?
Yep.
Oh my God, kitty!
Oh, that's Queequeg.
Hi! Oh my God,
He doesn't get it. Yeah, he's super sweet. Say hello. Okay, never mind.